just left Abbott and Costello. They had just starred in their first solo picture, Buck Privates, and it was a huge hit. Now, they didn't know that when they went to work on their second film, or what was supposed to be their second film, a movie that was originally titled Oh, Charlie. As we stated in the last video, the way B pictures worked back then is they had a very quick turnaround. It was, you get done with one picture, you have maybe a week off, and then you go right to work on the next one. That was the point of a B picture. You do it quick, you do it on the cheap, and then you release it, and hopefully it makes more money than it costs to make. So, Buck Privates finishes filming, and the boys go right to work on this second picture. While working on the second picture, and it's debatable how far into it they were. Some say it was like halfway done, some say it was about a third of the way done, but they were pretty deep into this film when the receipts came back on Buck Privates, and so it was not just a hit, it was a mega hit, especially for the time. And the powers that be at Universal wanted to capitalize on this quickly. And so it was decided that they were going to put Oh, Charlie on hold. They were going to come back to it a little bit later on, but they wanted to put that picture on hold and get the boys into another picture. So not just the fact that Buck Privates was such a huge hit, but also the fact that, as I mentioned in the last video, the studio got very little of that money. The money went to the theater owners on that one. So Universal was very quick to try to repeat the success of Buck Privates, and one of the ways they thought was best to do that was to quickly make another service picture, and that is why it was decided that for their, what would be their official second film, Bud and Lou would now join the Navy. Couple things I want to bring up, and something I didn't really talk about last time when we were talking about the Abbott and Costello formula. We're going to see a couple other things about that formula pop up in this film, not necessarily in a good way, but there's one really important ingredient to the Abbott and Costello formula, especially when it comes to these service pictures, and especially when it comes to some films they're going to be making later down the road. And that is that while their service pictures were comedies, naturally, you know, Buck Privates is them kind of having fun with the Army, and in the Navy follows in that tradition. But it's very important to note that these films did not lampoon the Army or the Navy. They did not make them out to look foolish. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned with Buck Privates, these films were just kind of a hair away from being propaganda pieces. They were there to showcase the competence and the good nature and the good will of the armed forces. So, Bud and Lou, one of the things they did very, very well with their films is that even in films where they're making a parody of something, they are never being disrespectful. They are showing these institutions in their best possible light, and it's Bud Abbott and Lou Costello who are the sources of comedy, that they can't seem to function normally within these structures. And you see things like that emerge a little bit more in the Navy, this desire to show the armed forces in an even more desirable light. We're a little further into 1941 by this point. When this film is released, it's May of 1941, so we're etching a little bit closer to the day of destiny, unfortunately. But tensions are still on the rise. People are still nervous. You know, there's that kind of cloud hanging over us, and it's getting a little darker because we're a little further into the year. And so this picture comes out, and once again, it's designed to kind of lift spirits, but also generate interest in the Navy and generate support for the Navy. And it's little things that this movie does that kind of sell that message. For instance, one of the big things about this one, and it's something that I think a lot of people overlook, but I think it's really important, showing just even how much of a difference just a couple of months made back in 1941, in the Navy, and with the last service picture they do a little while later, this time Bud and Lou are not tricked into joining the armed service. They're not reluctant members of the armed forces. In this film, they are seasoned sailors, or rather, they've been in the Navy for at least 6 years. They're willing participants. And we see here with this film, and again, we'll see this even more in their next service picture, that there is a desire from the characters that they play to do a good job. Lou wants to be a good sailor in this film. He wants to be taken seriously, and he wants to do his job to the best of his ability. That's very present in him. It's a source of shame for his character early on that he's been in the Navy 6 years and has never been assigned to a boat because he's too incompetent. And when he finally gets assigned to a boat, it's a moment of celebration for him until, of course, it shows that he's incompetent on the boat as well. So it's a tiny shift from being a reluctant member of the armed forces to being a willing member of the armed forces, and someone who is desperately trying to be useful. That shows, again, just how much a difference even a couple of months make within this time frame. So, Buck in the Navy is essentially Buck Privates, but on the water, with everything that kind of worked in Buck Privates ratcheted up a little bit. So once again, what's the story of this one? Well, once again, like with Buck Privates, we kind of have two stories going on. The driving story is that we have Dick Powell starring as, or rather I should say co-starring as, a crooner by the name of Tommy Holstead, who performs under the name Russ Raymond, and who is this big heartthrob, you know, that all the women are cheering for, and he gets tired of it, and he decides to quit it and go join the Navy. And he's being pursued by this female reporter who's trying to prove that he is this missing pop star, and he's trying to get away from her because he wants to live a normal life. So that's the main thrust of the story. That's the main thing. The Beast plot, which is sad that Abbott and Costello once again feel like they have the B plot in their own picture, is Lou is desperately in love with Patty Andrews of the Andrews Sisters. So the Andrews Sisters are back, and so he sent her all of these letters saying that he was this great admiral and this great man in the Navy, and when Patty comes, she finds that he's, you know, a fat little pastry chef, and it's him trying to, you know, win Patty over. So that's kind of the two stories going on here. So yes, once again, we have the dual plot line. It doesn't feel as egregious in this one as it feels in Buck Privates, because at least in this one, Dick Powell interacts with Abbott and Costello. They have a lot of scenes together, and their characters are friends. So this film, even though, again, two very different plots, the plots intersect more, and you feel like Abbott and Costello have a bearing on this other driving storyline. I should also mention that Dick Powell is probably one of the more famous supporting players in an Abbott and Costello film. Dick Powell was a big star at the time, and a big radio star. He was famous for playing Richard Diamond, a singing detective on the radio. And so his name is actually below Abbott and Costello's in this. It's not even it's Abbott and Costello and Dick Powell in the Navy, and not Abbott and Costello in the Navy with Dick Powell. You know, he's like a second or third build, depending on how you gauge it, star in this. So that's kind of a feat, because a lot of the people who are going to be playing the second fiddles in these Abbott and Costello movies are, you know, journeymen, day players, people with very long resumes. When you look some of these people up on IMDb, they have a long list of credits to their name, but they're not, in most cases, they're not people that you would go, oh yeah, I know that person. You know, they're character actors. But Dick Powell is a good actor, and he works well with the boys. Speaking of working well with the boys, this film features another famous member of a comedy team who would do a couple of pictures with Abbott and Costello, Shemp Howard. Now, if you don't know, Shemp Howard is the original third stooge of the Three Stooges. The Three Stooges, of course, being made up of Moe Howard, Larry Fine, and originally Shemp Howard. Shemp left the team and, pursued a solo career for a while, doing a lot of these little bit parts, showing up here in this film, while his role in the Three Stooges was taken by he and Moe's younger brother, Curly, which would become, of course, the famous Larry, Moe, and Curly. And then when Curly died, Shemp came back to take up his role as the third stooge. So this is a neat crossover between two very famous comedy teams. And Shemp would do a couple of films with Bud and Lou, never quite as engaged in them as he was in this one. Here he's almost, in certain comedy bits, he's almost like a third member of the team, and he works very well with them. He works very well with Lou especially. And working with Lou was not easy, from what I understand. One, he had a tendency to ad-lib and just, so you had to go with it. And two, he was not an easy person to work with, just generally, from all accounts. And that's why Bud was so important, is Bud knew how to control him and how to keep him on task. So yeah, wonderful fun with Shemp Howard in this one. Again, of course, it's lovely to see the Andrews sisters again, and this time having a bit more of a drive on the plot. They're not just there for the musical numbers, but they do their musical numbers. So the music in this film is already better, again, than One Night in the Tropics. The Andrews sisters doing the music, and Dick Powell does a few songs. Very good. I'm going to talk about the negative before I get into the real positives. I have some real praise for this movie that I want to give it. But I spoke at length in the last video about the Abbott and Costello formula and how their films kind of follow a certain pattern. Well, there's one element of that I didn't mention because it really comes into play more in this film than it did so much in Buck Privates. Now, one of the things that we talked about with these movies is that, again, they don't have the strongest plots. They're less plots and more scenarios. Just something to get the boys from one routine to the next, generally. Now, that's fine, and that works for most of their films, for a great length of them. But the problem is when you get to the end, when you're coming to the close of a film, and a story needs a climax, if you don't have much of a story to speak of, what do you do? How do you end the film? Well, what we find is that in a lot of Abbott and Costello films, what they choose to close the film down with is these extended, I'm going to call them chase scenes, with Bud and Lou just like riding on something, a car, skis, an airplane, in this case, a battleship, and they're driving it around in fast motion, meaning they speed the film up, which never looks good. Or they're using really bad green screen. Of course, they would have called it green screen back then. Or they're using stunt doubles who clearly are not them. Or in some cases, dummies, that are clearly not them. And these chase scenes go on just shy of forever. Most Abbott and Costello movies, I'm almost ashamed to say this, but most Abbott and Costello movies, I love until we get to the climax, and then I fast forward to the last jokes at the wrap up. It's because they are not funny, and they go on for bloody ever. In this case, it's this sequence where, trying to impress Patty Andrews, Costello mistakenly drugs the captain of the ship he's on. The captain falls asleep. Lou masquerades as the captain and, faking sending orders down to the engine room, accidentally sends orders down to the engine room, and so the ship is speeding all around. They're blowing things up. Lou's being tossed all over. It's not funny. It's just not. What's interesting about this one is that that was how the film was scheduled to end. But the Navy, who obviously had to sign off on a lot of this, and they were apparently a little bit more hands-on with the production than the Army was with Buck Privates. They made a couple corrections, like the The foil, the comic foil for Bud and Lou in this one was a chief petty officer named Dynamite, who was originally supposed to be a captain or an admiral, and the Navy said, make it a chief petty officer, so that they're not disobeying that high up of an officer, So anyway, the Navy got a hold of this scene and said, we can't have them doing that. We can't have the Navy look to be this inept, and to show someone putting people in that kind of danger, driving a boat around, that's horrible. We can't do that. So the solution they came up with for this one was the age-old chestnut, let's make it a dream sequence. And they did. So what's even worse is that, this movie, it does this big dream sequence ending. And then literally the movie just wraps up this entire plot, like everything. Dick Powell decides he's going to marry this female reporter that's been dogging him from coast to coast with no real explanation. It's like you have had no friendly interactions. You hate each other. We haven't seen you fall in love, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm going to marry you. That'll show you. And there's no resolution to the Costello and Patty storyline. So the film just kind of ends. So, again, this is a pattern that is going to show up in a lot of Abbott and Costello movies, and it's really egregious here. The movie is great until it gets to this point, and then you just kind of, it's like, okay, I can't handle the rest of this. Now, what I want to talk about to kind of wrap us up on this one is that even though I think Buck Private structurally is the stronger film, this one has a very sentimental place in my heart. This one has a really important place in my life for a couple of the routines that are done. Of course, Bud and Lou are still crisp as ever. They're still doing their classic vaudeville routine, but two of the routines they do in this film, my best friend and I, my best friend Matt, and our friend Chris, we did for talent shows in junior high and high school. They do a bit where, the math bit, where Lou is trying to convince Abbott that 7 times 13 is, or 7 divided by 28 is 13. And we did that for a talent show. But the crown jewel of this film, in my opinion, is a bit they do early on. It's called the Lemon Table. And in this bit, Bud is playing essentially, kind of like you do with 3-card Monty. He's got 3 cups. He hides a lemon under one of them. He switches them around. The table that he's doing it has a hole in it, so the lemon falls through the hole. So when Lou picks the, which one he thinks the lemon is under, oh, no, it's not under that one. Now, obviously, there has to be a great deal of suspension of disbelief that you don't see this huge hole in the middle of the table. But if you can do that, then this routine is hysterical. And it's done to perfection here. And this was the routine. This was the very first routine that my best friend Matt and our friend Chris that we did for a talent show when we were in middle school. And my girlfriend Rebecca and I right now do a little podcast called Date Night. And right now we're watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and talking about the episodes. And in our first episode, she said, well, can you, you saw this as when you were younger. I saw it more as an adult. So, how much is nostalgia going to paint your vision? And with Buffy, and that's kind of the point I made, I said, I don't think it's going to paint it too much, because I was still an adult. I was a young adult, but I was an adult. And I don't think nostalgia paints my view of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but nostalgia definitely paints my view of this movie. Because watching the Lemon Table and laughing at the Lemon Table when they are doing this routine, I immediately flash back to all of those lunch periods that myself, Matt, and Chris spent. I forget in whose room they were. One of the teachers let us use their room, and we set up and we rehearsed this bit like over and over. We kept adding other bits of theirs. We added the 2 10s for 5. We added some of their other bits. And when we went and did this for the talent show, man, it was magic. I'm sad to say I don't believe any footage exists of this. I'm sad to say. But yeah, both these routines we did for talent shows, and yeah, structurally, I don't think this movie holds together as well as Buck Private's or even some of their other bits. But watching it back and seeing them do these routines, it's an immediate flashback in a good way, and just kind of that thing of, man, that was a lot of fun there with my two buddies, my best friend, and doing this routine. It was it was just one of the best times I ever had in school, I'll be honest. There's also, this has nothing to do with my little nostalgia trip, just kind of back on some of the Lou Costello bits. This film also has a big thing with him and his slapstick. There's a bit where he's trying to sleep in a hammock for the first time. He can't quite lift himself up and get himself into bed. He keeps overshooting and falling and hitting the ground. And I gotta tell you, some of these Lou Costello slapstick things, they're funny, but you watch them and you notice there's no give to that floor. There, he is landing slap on it, and you're just like, oh, dude, that's gotta fucking hurt. I don't think we really appreciate those vaudeville comedians and the extreme lengths they went through physically. There's a story with the Three Stooges that, because Larry Fine, the one with the the bald patch and the curly hair, he got such a callus on his face from Moe slapping him repeatedly, because it was full contact. They weren't pulling those punches. When Bud Abbott smacks Lou, he is smacking him. I don't think we really appreciate how much discomfort these comedians put themselves through to get a laugh. It's real, almost kind of like professional wrestlers, really. So this film comes out, again, released in May of 1941, and it's an even bigger hit than Buck Private. As a matter of fact, it was the sixth biggest film of 1941. So that's two smash hits Bud and Lou have had pretty much back to back. So they finished filming in the Navy, and they've got this other picture on the shelf that they stopped filming to go and take care of in the Navy. So now the studio wants them to go back, finish up this other picture, put the Andrews Sisters now in it, get some more footage of the Andrews Sisters in there, since that's a big hit, and let's get that picture out as quickly as possible, because we got a money train here, and it's not going to slow down for a little bit. So Bud and Lou go back to work almost immediately on their third picture, which was originally their second picture, again, a comedy that was originally called Oh, Charlie, but as it would go through, would metamorphosis into the film Hold That Ghost. And that is going to be the subject of the next time we meet for Drive Home Reviews, meet Abbott and Costello. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for allowing me to talk about my passions. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.